how do we define quality? We look at each other and then we make it up. That's it's what we do.
Oh, that's so good.
Think about this. I've got a sample right here. Coffee beans. There's coffee beans in there. Those coffee beans have stuff in them.
Yeah.
Acids, salts, carbohydrates. They got volatiles. They got stuff in them. What they don't have in them is quality. That's a very good sample right there, but there's nothing in there called quality.
Way to put it. You know, it reminds me of the days when Intelligentsia used to put shiny as a flavor note on their bags. If you've ever thought about doing business in the Middle East, or you're just curious about what's happening in one of the most exciting coffee markets in the world, we've launched a new direction for the Map of Forward Middle East podcast as an invaluable resource to help you find out more about doing business in the region. It features real conversations with values-driven entrepreneurs and businesses that have been operating in the region for years. Just as the global podcast, the Map of Forward Middle East podcast will talk about opportunities, challenges, and the reality of building something sustainable in a fast evolving market. The show is in English and the guests are deeply inspiring. Search Map of Forward Middle East wherever you get your podcasts, hit subscribe and share it with your friends. Welcome to the Daily Coffee Pro by Map of Forward, friends. I'm your host, Lee Safar, and this is episode 2 of a 5-part series with Ian, the Director of Sensory Analysis from Cafe Imports in the United States. We are talking about what is quality in the coffee industry, and in this episode, we're going to talk about what my favorite question to ask everyone is at the moment, and that is, how do we define quality, or what is quality? So, Ian, how do you define quality?
How do I define quality?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. How do I define quality? I look at my time in the coffee industry.
Yeah.
I look at our past cupping stuff. I talk to like my sourcing team, my sales team, our purchasing partners, our selling partners. I just gather all that up and attempt to create a industry norm, right? So defining, and I answer in this way specifically because this is my job, and I've done all of that as part of my job. So if you're asking, Ian, what do you like? I am
asking Ian before I ask you how we as an industry do that, because I want to get a baseline for the distance between how you consider quality and how we as an industry, from what you understand, is how we assess quality.
Yeah. So Ian is looking for coffees that are sweet, balanced, and we'll call it well prepped. And to me, that will also include that, like, behave nicely in the roaster.
Okay.
That's what I'm looking for when I think of quality as Ian, just as me.
Okay.
When I'm looking for how do I define quality as Ian, Director of Sensory at Cafe Imports?
Yep.
It gets a little bit broader and it gets more technical. And it also has to do with, well, what is this being tendered as? If you send me a sample tendered as a low grade, if it matches spec, that's perfect quality. That's 100% quality. That's perfect grade.
You know, one of the things that I loved about my conversation with Reza, and anyone who hasn't seen that series, I'll include links for it in the show notes. Everybody should go and check that series. I walked away with it with so many questions about quality, which is what every conversation should leave you with, in my opinion. And one of the things that I started to kind of like really chew on as a question was, how layered, really, how many layers is there to this perspective of this question, what is quality? And I think there are so many more than well, let me say it this way. You can't answer the question, what is quality, or how do we define quality, unless we do what you were saying, which is like giving a perspective of where's the starting point of where we want to answer that from. So if I'm answering that in the context of I'm defining this for a customer that has very specific needs, well, if this is going to meet their needs, this is high, medium, low quality based on what they're looking for, which then if you extrapolate that out into, say, all of specialty coffee or all of coffee in general, everything, it feels very fractal.
Sure. Yes. So how do we define quality? We look at each other and then we make it up. That's it's what we do.
Oh, that's so good.
Think about this. I've got a sample right here. Coffee beans. There's coffee beans in there. Those coffee beans have stuff in them.
Yeah.
Acids, salts, carbohydrates. They got volatiles. They got stuff in them. What they don't have in them is quality. That's a very good sample right there, but there's nothing in there called quality.
Way to put it. You know, it reminds me of the days when Intelligentsia used to put shiny as a flavor note on their bags.
Sure. Yeah. Why? I mean, why not? Why not?
Exactly.
Why not? So quality, we have to decide.
Yeah.
We could taste that and say, oh, we found these billion things in there. We could use the machine and get the gas chromatography. We could do whatever we want. We never find quality in there. We decide if what we found is quality. So now we have an option. We have a choice. We can just like make that up on the fly, which happens a lot. And what that usually boils down to is, am I in a good mood? Do I feel like this is good? Do I like this? Right?
How does this make me feel?
This is the new definition of quality. This is the current specialty coffee. Currently is any coffee that entertains me right now, that I find distinctive. What does distinctive mean? Distinctive means I tasted it and something went, I'm entertained enough to say that this is quality. That's just preference to the nth degree momentarily at the table. The other way to look at quality is to compare a thing to a standard. Now, the standard is still made up.
That's the part that I'm trying to get people to understand. Like, there's a baseline that's created. Somebody creates that baseline. If the baseline is being created by people who don't have your interests at heart and have their own interests at heart, this is where politics and economics comes into quality.
Yes, for sure. 100%. And it's, I used to be a Q grader. I've learned a ton from Q graders. I have a huge amount of respect for a lot of Q graders. I will say, though, that similar to what I said in the last episode, the heart of the Q program, in my view, was not so much the program as it was the people carrying that program.
Right.
And I say that as a preface because one of the big flaws, one of the big negative outcomes, I think, of the Q program was that people were defining quality on the cupping forum over and over and over again, to the point where I believe that they thought they were defining something that was within each and every coffee. But quality is not in the coffee. Now, what they were doing, and very well, I think, was establishing, building, maintaining a industry norm for some definition of quality. It was fuzzy. It's absolutely fuzzy. But that's what they were doing. So they had an idea of, this is what the industry standard or norm for quality is. It's not written down anywhere. Returns, you go to a competition, and if there's 20 people at the table, you have an 8-point spread on every coffee from high to low. Maybe it's outliers, but like I think that was one of my talk about that in competition time. But 8-point spread is like, that was an eye-opening moment for me. Okay, well, how do we define this thing that now? After having said all of that, there's two more things that come up for me. One is, thank goodness, think about the CVA.
I think about it far too much, unfortunately.
Right. Well, now think about if the body of people that created that, instead of making carte blanche, it doesn't matter what you say, no more responsibility for anyone, just say it's specialty or not specialty, and what you say goes. You don't have to defend it anymore. It's just, you're fine. Think if those people instead said, you know what? We're going to make a universal standard for quality. Like, we lucked out. We got off so easy, because if they had gone out and said, you know what? These are the actual check boxes for everyone for quality. Now, I don't
That would have
necessarily
been
think
worse.
they would have done that.
That would have been
so
worse.
terrible.
That would have been much worse. Oh,
No.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Go
I reject the preface that our industry is aspiring to at the moment, that we have to define what we have to have a unified understanding of what quality is. Do you see where I'm going with that?
Yes. We can't have a unified definition. We can't. But everyone needs to define quality. Specifically, here's what I mean.
Okay.
Just because we can't have a universal definition, and when I talk about defining quality, when I talk about definitions of quality, I don't mean you come and say, hey, what's a specialty coffee? And I say it's a coffee that has outstanding attributes. That doesn't, we haven't shared any information there. I've just tried to defend myself. What I mean is, I need to say, when I taste lemon, that has a value. When I taste citrus zest, that has a different value. When I taste orange marmalade, that has a different value.
To whom?
Here are those, to me.
To you, not on industry-wide, but to you when you're assessing. That's my point. Yeah, great.
You could never do that industry-wide. It would be so problematic and broken. Now, I think going back to that idea of industry norms, I think you could do that. I think you can do that without being like wildly controversial.
Okay.
There's going to be limits and boundaries, but like we could probably say for some section of people, it's going to be just fine to say that lemon is better than rotten parsnip.
Those are two extremes. We could agree on that.
Yes.
But what we couldn't agree on is blueberry is better than orange.
Absolutely not. We could never. We couldn't agree on that.
But that's what the bullshit we get into as an industry.
I think it would be silly to try. However, without agreeing on that, it's really important. If I have an opinion on that blueberry orange debate, and you have an opinion on that, it's really important that we state that, and not only state that, but state that in advance of an exchange. So if you're trying to sell me coffee, I don't want you to say, here's your sample. I hope that you like it. I want you to say, here's your sample. I know that you think orange is better than blueberry. I think that I've got more orange in here than blueberry. I hope that's what you find.
Word.
Your assessment, right? The standard is not that it's about being correct. It's about that
aligned.
It is me saying, here's what we're doing. Here's our work. Here's what we think. We're not right. We don't have the answer handed down from on high about orange versus blueberry forever and ever. Amen. We just think that. And we think it in a way that says every time we taste it, we're going to stick to that. We've said that, we're going to stick to it. We're going to do it over and over and over again. Orange is going to be orange, and blueberry can be blueberry. And if you are the world's best purveyor of blueberry coffees, and we don't have the capacity or the appreciation for that, it's like a professional courtesy for you to know before sending us coffee. And it's ridiculous for me to come back to you and say, well, this one's not quality. This one's not specialty because it tastes more like blueberry than orange. That's silly. I can say, however, this is not to our specification, and here's our specification. This is not to our standard. Here's our standard. Not here's the universal one, not here's the magic one. Here's ours. Here's how our buttons work. Here's how our system works. We tasted it. We did all the stuff that we don't really talk about in coffee, which is super important. How do you set up your flight so that after the fact, when we're talking about, if we're talking about a coffee that we tasted, your question should always be, well, wasn't that because of, and then you list off 30 things that's not the coffee. Wasn't that because of the roast? No, we use stupid roasters. Wasn't it because of the grind? No, we use a ridiculous grinder. Wasn't it because of the water? Wasn't it because it was set up after a different coffee that influenced it? No, we blind and replicate everything. Wasn't it because my job is to understand what those 30 questions are and build cupping tests that address as many of those as well as possible. And I can tell you, that's not the 5-cup presentation. The 5-cup presentation leads into more of those errors. What are we talking? How do we define quality?
You're bang on with all of this. You said you had a list. You said you had 2 more. You did one. Do you have anything? Because I have questions.
Let's go to the questions. Let's go to the questions.
Talk to me about the difference between the subjectivity and objectivity of quality.
Sure. Okay. Let's start with objectivity. Objectivity.
Is it objective? Can it be objective?
Yes. And here's how.
Okay.
First of all, we have to understand objectivity does not mean like third-person omniscience, right? Like objective cupper does not mean I am the narrator of a book that I'm writing and know everything about everything.
You just described coffee people, bro.
And that's we're good. Yeah.
So, I mean, I love my people. Please, I don't want anyone to come for me with daggers, but tell me I'm wrong.
I'll tell you that's not objectivity. Objectivity does not require that. That doesn't exist. That is like extreme subjectivity, really, right?
Extreme subjectivity.
Objectivity, what we're going to talk about when we're distinguishing these is once we establish that we're not deities, we're going to look at what does it mean to be objective and subjective, and we're going to look at objective means we're going to be object focused. Subjective means we're going to be subject focused. Object focused testing means we're going to ask questions about the object. And from a sensory science perspective, we're going to use subjects as instruments to measure objects, object attributes. The reverse will be for subjectivity. We're going to use objects to measure subject attributes. So think back, we talked about my coffee sample problem. It has acids, carbohydrates, etc. It doesn't have quality as an ingredient. Mm-hmm. Those acids, all those things, those are coffee attributes. Quality is a human attribute. Mm-hmm. So if we want to do an objective test, we're going to use subjects. So there's like subject is not automatically subjectivity. Subject, I always have a background, a paradigm, predilections, biases, but you can drop me into an object-oriented test in an environment that supports focus on the object, and I can tell you about, to the best of my ability, object information, and I'm going to say, okay, we're being as objective as we can.
But
we're being objective. That's an objective test.
Excuse me. As objective as we can, and this is where I think those who want to keep going on about sensory science in our industry, and they keep throwing that at me. Objectivity isn't sort of like I'm being objective with one eye closed. You can't get sort of objective. Objectivity is, and I say this as a scientist, objectivity is pretty black and white. Subjectivity
Think
is everything else.
Think about objectivity, as I've understood it, is a relatively recent concept, and by that I mean I'm not going to rattle off dates. I could be fact checked way too easily, but you can look all this up. So think about those old timey nature drawings, like plant biology drawings or little animal drawings. Those were for a long time, those panels or those images were those were the scientific drawings. And those drawings for a long time were effectively objectivity. But in order to render that drawing, none of those drawings actually matched anything in nature. Those drawings were all composites of effectively the ideal expression of the caterpillar or the leaf or the monarch butterfly. Now, at a certain point, people realize and at a certain point was actually around the time the camera. So now you got a clue for what dates we're trying to get at. I'm still not going to give you dates.
No problem. I'm with you.
Around the time the camera started to come out, people were taking pictures and realized these drawings, which we thought were the best, the pinnacle, never match any instance in the natural world of this thing. So now we have a shift in terms of, okay, so how could that drawing be objective when the actual object is actually just an instance of the object? And we have to look at each instance, and the objectivity has to include that concept of the instance, that variability, that non-reproducibility, that I would say that concept of one instance, two instance, three instance, etc. So there's space in that.
And the space is where, in my understanding, the space is where the subjectivity lives. Let me give you a correlation as I understand it. Someone drinks a coffee and says, oh, this is acidic. And then I hand them a test and say, here's a pH meter. Tell me exactly how acidic this is. One of those is objective and one of those is subjective. Okay. Right?
Yeah.
And that is how clear-cut objective versus subjective is. Science is saying, when people say sensory science, it drives me fucking crazy, because I'm not saying there's anything wrong with sensory science. What I'm saying is it's not objective. When we're trying to define quality through sensory science, we are not getting absolutes. It is all subjective. And people keep saying to me that, and there's sensory scientists that are saying this, people are saying, but it is science because it's a consensus agreement. Okay. Well, that's market research, folks. That's not science.
I feel like consensus agreement is just mass subjectivity if it wants to be. But I will push back.
Please, go ahead.
I will push back on the difference between the subject being a subject and subjectivity. So in the pH meter versus human test, the human who is able to reliably report acidity and I suppose pH, so give them coffee, give them orange juice, give them whatever. They are, I believe if a person's trained to do that and they can do that reliably, and you don't have a pH meter, you can just start pushing beverages you can just start putting things in their mouth and saying, your task now is to spit out and tell me the pH. And they can do that. They're being objective.
No, it's still just a guess.
They're a subject, but I think it's more than a guess. Now, if you're not trained to do it, and we see this a lot.
Even if you're trained to do it, you still have to back it up. In order for it to be objective, it still needs to be measured. anything that's objective needs to be
yes.
measured. And it needs to be able to be verified. And you and I need to be able to replicate that in order for it to be objective. When you're tasting
100%.
blueberry and I'm tasting blueberry, even if we're eating an actual blueberry, I can never verify that what signals and how you're interpreting blueberry and I'm interpreting blueberry is the same thing. Therefore, by definition, it is subjective.
Yep. So we have a significant difference in sensitivity between the pH meter and my ability to say more or less, much less acidic. pH meter will be able to get fine-tuned stuff between items. I will not be as fine-tuned, but I'm not necessarily just throwing stuff at the wall and
But
guessing.
you're also not objective in the sense that you have biases, you have a biochemistry that allows you to interpret all of that data in a specific way. Also, you are reacting with any acids or bases in your body in a different way based on the different time of day, the different amount of hormones that are being released. Tools do not do that.
Right. Yep. So you've just identified like a huge reason for the difference in sensitivity.
Right.
But you could have a good tool and a bad tool. You could have a because we could go
I agree.
right now and we could buy a really nice pH meter.
Right.
And we could buy a simple one.
Right.
And you have different purposes for those meters.
Right.
So if all I'm doing is like measuring my fish tank, I have a tolerance that's like I need to be within
who broke us this
range.
way? Who fucking lied to the coffee industry and convinced us that we are objective? I'm fascinated to figure out who is the person that's going around and saying that sensory scientists are objective when they assess quality.
Lee, I think in terms of the coffee industry, we did it ourselves, right? Think about the narrative that we have, right? We talk like we're the quality ones. We find the good coffees. We're the experts. We're the people that our neighbors, our friends who are not in industry come to and they say, hey, what do you think about this coffee? Hey, what should I go get? We're those ones. And so we have this whole identity. See, now I'm going to get just a little bit Buddhist about it. We have this whole identity built around like, yeah, you should come ask me about that stuff. Oh, I'm the guy. That in order to keep that going now, well, how come you're the guy? Well, I'm not only an expert, I'm also pretty objective.
Except you're not.
You're just biased, but I like
the ego.
There's a bit of ego, there's a bit of narrative built into that becomes self-reinforcing because, and this is where I think that you're too black and white because there is differences in sensitivity and there is training and there is like measuring of things by humans. Like I can't smell as much as my dog can, but I can smell some stuff.
And I'm not trying
and I can
go on, please.
Yeah.
No.
And I can distinguish it. Now my biases come in.
Yeah.
Right. That all comes in. But I could be correct. So someone could come and say like, hey, what coffee should I get? And I could be like a little bit of a coffee som for a second if I'm on my game and say like, oh, you're not asking what I like. You're asking what you should get. So what are you going to do? What are you looking for? Like we could actually make this about people again and we could talk and then I could suggest something and it might be right because it's based on information that I've got and it's based on tasting that I've done and it's based on a lot of people things that are subjective, but it's also based on coffee things where I'm focused on the object. I'm using myself as an instrument. I'm using my team as instruments.
And I'm not
focused
trying to
on that.
diminish that at all. And I think that the teams that are better calibrated, that have more experience, that can use better words to describe stuff, and that have experience cupping many coffees are going to be better at being able to talk about coffee and they're able to connect customers with the coffees that they want. And I absolutely am there for all of that. But the idea that that sensory science is objective without using tools that measure things, a food technologist would never dare say that is objective. And what I think is dangerous for us as an industry is that we are tricking people into doing all of these courses to turn them into pseudo food technologists and telling them that they are absolutely correct because they have been trained by a sensory scientist. And because they are objective. It's just not fair. One, it's not fair to food technologists who have gone through 4 or 5 years worth of training to be able to call themselves that. And 2, is just factually incorrect.
Yeah. Well, there's more good news for you here, which is that most people taking these classes won't be trained by sensory scientists. They're gonna. I mean, how do you make use of these classes? You start teaching them yourself. So.
On that note, folks, let's go into an even spicier subject. We're going to talk about the role of coffee competitions, and the role that they play in quality. So join us for that. Peace, love, and peanut butter. Have an amazing rest of your day. This episode is part of a 5-part series produced by Mapper Forward. Check the full playlist and guest details in the show notes, as well as how you can support our work in the coffee industry. Become a premium YouTube subscriber, explore our Patreon and any brands we've partnered with to bring you this podcast. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It really does help us grow our audience.